Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dan Trottencheck with the North American Retail Hardware Association. I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar session. We're going to be talking about the rebirth of DIY, ? Again, my name is Dan Trottencheck. I'm the editor of Hardware Retailing Magazine and the Vice President of Publishing for the North American Retail Hardware Association. Again, thank you all for attending. This is one in the entire series of webinars the NRHA will be conducting this year. We have a total of 12 webinars planned throughout the course of the year, and we would like to invite you to come to all of them. And so to register for those and to see the upcoming schedule, I would encourage you to go to www.nrha.org. Before we get started this afternoon, I want to go over a few housekeeping issues with all you guys. First of all, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties throughout the webinar, if you're having a problem watching it, or if you get kicked out or anything like that, you can contact WebEx for technical support. Their phone number is 866-229-3239, or you can send an email question to WebEx about technical support at support@webex.com. Other housekeeping issues, we would love to have questions from the audience throughout the course of the webinar, but since all of the attendees are actually muted, we can't hear you talking. The most effective way to ask a question is you'll see a little Q&A bar on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can type in your question there, and we will answer it throughout the course of the webinar as time permits. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and get the ball rolling on what we're going to talk about today. And this is a topic that's important to anybody in the home improvement industry, whether you're selling the products at the retail level, at the wholesaling level, or the manufacturing level. What's going on with the do-it-yourselfer and today's consumer is a very important topic. It should be kind of near and dear to your hearts. As all of our webinars, we are sponsored by the North American Retail Hardware Association, NRHA's Vendor Partner Program, which is manufacturers who have banded together with NRHA to reach out to the independent segment of the retail market, the National Hardware Show, and Hardware Retailing Magazine. So let's talk a little bit about the do-it-yourselfer and what's going on with today's consumers. The reason we even started down this road of figuring out what's going on in consumers' minds today in terms of what they're doing as far as household projects was because of everything that's happened recently with the economy. Before what we've recently gone through in terms of recession and the housing market slide, there was some conventional wisdom out there about what was going to happen to do-it-yourself activity in the future as we moved forward. So what was that conventional wisdom? It was something that myself and other industry analysts had really kind of looked at do-it-yourself activity and saw do-it-yourself activity kind of engaging in a gradual decline as we moved forward in the years. Well, why did we think that? One, an aging population, which if you look at the demographics, there are a greater number of people moving from that 55-year-old age bracket on up. An aging population will be less apt to perform do-it-yourself activities in the home and more apt to what we would call a DIY or buy-it-yourself project, where they would buy the item and hire someone else to install them. We also felt that the younger generation hadn't developed those kind of DIY skills or that taste for DIY that generations like the baby boomers had. One of the reasons for that is that many of these people, the younger generations coming up, were probably more in the suburban or lifestyle, where they weren't perhaps watching their parents do as many projects around the home as generations before. Another reason was that the mass merchants and big boxes had kind of trained customers to expect less in the way of customer service, so they were less informed about how to perform DIY projects. And again, the last thing was today's consumer really considered their time as a more valuable asset to them than the actual cost of money. So that time value of money was apt to push consumers to do a little bit more in terms of hiring people to perform the projects as opposed to doing it themselves. So all the analysts, myself included, several years ago thought that DIY was poised for a decline. Well, why that's important in our marketplace, particularly for the independent retail segment, is that independent retailers really hang their hats on being able to provide customer service and project solutions. Well, if more people began to buy their projects, buy their products for the project, and hire people to do it, that service may become less important. So it was a word of warning for independent retailers that as DIY activity maybe began to slow, they might want to look at focusing more on serving the DIY customer in different ways. But that being said, we are now entering a new reality. What caused the new reality? Well, here are a few things. Obviously, we've all been witness to the housing market swirling around the toilet bowl. We've also seen unemployment at its highest level in decades. We've seen individuals in that 55 and older age bracket having to postpone retirement as they saw their retirement savings dwindle. We've seen access to consumer credit drying up. Fewer people able to get the credit either out of their homes or just in traditional means to get credit to perform larger scale remodeling projects on their homes. More consumers have decided to stay put in their homes because selling a home has become more difficult. And I put in there if they can, meaning if they're not facing some sort of upside down in their mortgage or facing some sort of foreclosure. So more consumers have decided to stay in their homes. And now we've really seen the opposite of what we saw about 3 or 4 years ago, where consumers had money but they didn't have time. Now we're seeing more consumers with time and less money. So that's really what generated the whole question of have consumers changed their concepts towards do-it-yourself activity. So we asked the question, do all these factors translate to a rebirth in DIY? And what we found was really rather interesting. How did we find this out? How did we come up with the findings that we're going to talk about today? Well, NRHA and Hardware Retailing Magazine, one of the biggest things we do throughout the course of the year, every year, is we conduct research at many different levels. We'll do research with retailers, we'll do research with manufacturers, and probably most importantly, we do research with consumers so we can determine what are some of the changing attitudes and changing consumer trends out there so we can help our retail members and others in the industry better understand what is going on and how to position their businesses. So it was no different with this study. We fielded a survey with more than 1,500 consumers. We asked them about their current DIY habits and their plans for performing DIY in the future. And we asked them what were some of the motivators, what were some of the things that caused them to perform do-it-yourself activity. Then we asked them where they turn for products and advice. And really in each one of these areas, we found some very interesting things that are going on. So what did we discover? We discovered that consumers are still engaging in DIY activity. We discovered that consumers plan to engage in slightly more DIY activity as we move forward, partially as a result of what we talked about as the new reality. Where some of the major changes were in consumers' motivation. What is getting them up off the couch to perform those projects themselves? There were some major changes in that area that we'll talk about in a second. We've also discovered some major changes in consumer makeup, how consumers define themselves and their DIY abilities. And then we've also seen a gradual shift in where consumers are turning for both purchasing their products and for their advice on do-it-yourself projects. So the big thing to take away from this part of the research is that the reports of the death of DIY may have been a bit premature. We may have all been assuming too much 3 and 4 years ago as analysts of the industry, looking at all these socioeconomic and demographic trends and really trying to bury DIY before we moved forward, before we really saw how it was going to play out. So the first part of it is I think we're a little bit premature in assuming that DIY activity was going to drop off as sharply as we originally felt it was. So where do we stand right now? The percentage of consumers in our study saying that their DIY activity in the last 12 months has remained about the same. That was about half the consumers said, my DIY activity over the last year is pretty much as it has been in previous years. 30% said their DIY activity has increased, while 22% said it's decreased. So again, there is a slightly higher percentage of consumers that are saying their DIY activity in the last year has increased. But really, the vast majority say it has remained relatively unchanged. What's good news on the DIY front for all parties is that 76% of our respondents had personally tackled a home improvement project within the last year. So 3/4 of everybody we surveyed said that they had tackled a DIY project within the last 12 months. 89% of these individuals say they complete, on average, between 1 and 6 DIY projects a year. So the people that are completing DIY projects are doing it multiple times. It's not just a one-off situation. Nearly 90% of all the consumers who said they had completed DIY projects, it's in that 1 to 6 project range. And one of the interesting things, we asked a lot of these consumers for direct feedback on their situations, and I've tried to use some quotes here to really encapsulate some of the sentiment we got from consumers across a wide range. And here's one from Virginia that said, "I've got more time and less money, so my to-do list just got a little longer." And that was the same sentiment we got from a lot of consumers, which we echoed at the front of this presentation, is that consumers are more concerned about their availability of cash and their ability to perform projects, so that may be one of the reasons they're performing more do-it-yourself projects, or more apt to do it, or have at least postponed hiring someone to do it, is because they not only are worried about cash, but they also have a little bit more time on their hands. Next, we asked consumers to tell us a percent of consumers saying they've completed a DIY project in terms of time frame. And never, 4%, between 6 and 12 months, 21%, within the past 6 months, 54%, and more than 12 months ago, 21%. So again, the vast majority of consumers have completed a project within the past 6 months. And when you take that figure before, and on the slide previous to this, that nearly 90% of consumers say they're completing between 1 and 6 projects a year, it's easy to see why that statistic would be the highest. It's something that's going on a regular basis in these homes. So what about the next year? What about moving forward? Again, very similar to the same numbers we saw before. 56% of the consumers said that they plan on remaining about the same in terms of their DIY activity over the next year. 30% said they see their DIY activity increasing, but only 14% said they see it decreasing. So again, that's an important statistic, because almost twice the number of consumers feel that they will increase their activity than feel they will decrease their activity. So again, it's not only a sign that their DIY activity may be increasing, but it's also reflective of the fact that more consumers are staying put in their homes, and we'll look at that, how that impacts these overall trends in a few slides here. So what about the other side of it? One of the interesting things about this is, while consumers tend to say that they're performing more DIY activity and they're still performing DIY activity, that does not necessarily mean they're not hiring a pro to complete projects. The majority of consumers, when we ask them who have hired a pro to complete a home improvement project in their homes within the last period of time, within the last 6 to 12 months, 17% had hired a pro. Within the past 6 months, 20%. More than 12 months ago, 41%, and 22% say never. So again, 37% within the last year as opposed to 41% 12 months or more. So maybe you're seeing just a little bit of drop-off on hiring pros over the last 12 months, but there's still activity. What these pros are doing is a lot more home repair and maintenance activity than remodeling projects or add-on projects or large-scale projects. What about going forward? 54% of the consumers, the majority of consumers, say their likelihood to hire a professional in the next 12 months is about the same. 23% said it might increase, and 23% said it might decrease. So really what you see is a pretty flat trend where, in terms of hiring pros, that consumers are really not changing their opinions. The same number that would feel they might increase activity, feel they might decrease it, but it really is going to remain about the same across the board. So what is the impact for all these things at retail? Rather than switching into buy-it-yourself mode and finding ways to really target your service and selection to meet the needs of those buy-it-yourself customers, retailers have to be prepared for a customer that needs help performing projects themselves and doing do-it-yourself projects, but they also need to offer product selection and pricing. Particularly lumber dealers and home centers that might see a greater influx of DIYers wanting to tackle increasingly complex projects. It's important to note that as money has overtaken time in terms of a value hierarchy for consumers, more DIYers are going to be tackling more complex projects, and I have some further statistics that support that in just a couple slides here. Here's one of the biggest areas where we saw a change among today's consumers and why they're performing do-it-yourself activities. We asked them, again, what is your motivation behind doing it yourself? 27% say, I want to make my home more comfortable to live in. an equal amount, and these are just the top 3 responses we got. There are other responses scattered in a variety of categories, but these were the ones that really stood out as having the top 2 here. An equal number, 27%, say, I want to maintain my home to keep it in good working order. Only 5% of the consumers we talked to said, I do-it-yourself projects to increase the value of my home. And why that's such an important statistic is that when we asked the same question about 7 years ago, that number was much higher. So what is that reflective of? Well, it's reflective of that new reality we were talking about. This new reality where people aren't trying to flip their homes. They're not planning on staying in their home for 4 or 5 years and doing do-it-yourself projects to increase the value of the home, not tiling the bathroom with the end result being, I think I can get more money out of my home when I sell it. What they're trying to do, their main motivators, are to make their current living and living surrounding areas more comfortable for them to be in and to maintain it. Why? Because they think they're going to be in their homes longer. Here again is another respondent from Missouri that really encapsulates that sentiment. I don't think I'm going to be able to sell my home anytime soon, so I might as well get comfortable. And again, it's important as a retail manufacturer or wholesaler to realize that that motivation for do-it-yourself activity, what consumers want to get out of the projects they are conducting at their homes, has really dramatically changed in the last 5 years. It is no longer how do I invest to improve, or how do I spend money and do projects to improve the value of my home. It's more what can I do to make my home more comfortable to be in because I know I'm going to be here for a while. 46% of the consumers we interviewed say, I get great satisfaction out of completing a home improvement project. And 47%, the majority of consumers, when asked why, again, about the motivations behind doing it themselves, indicated they perform DIY projects to save money. So again, what's nice about this from a balance standpoint is that consumers not only do these projects to save money, which is the chief motivator behind this is saving money, but they also do it because it's a hobby for them. They enjoy the satisfaction they get out of performing a project and improving their homes. So again, from any channel in the industry, you could look at this and say, that's what I need to tap into. I need to tap into, A, consumers' desire to save money. How can I show them how they can actually conduct these projects? How can I help walk them through these projects? If you're at the retail level, it's about training your employees. It's about making sure they understand how to get solutions for the customers who walk through the doors, but it also has implications at the manufacturing level, whether it be through product packaging or through POP literature you can provide, anything like that that can help convince these customers that they can do these projects and talk them through the projects and show them that they can save money doing it. Here's a respondent from Ohio that said, it just means more to me if I am able to take on a project and finish it. It's an experience. Let me take 1 second here real quick as we move into some of these other areas to answer a couple of questions that have come through. We had one attendant ask, are there differences by age and geography for those tackling DIY and BIY activity? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as we go through here. But one of the biggest interesting things, it really came more from a gender difference than it did an age difference, and certainly a geography difference. Just a little bit in terms of the methodology on this study is the 1,500 consumer surveys that we had completed for this study were a very broad mix of geographic areas. It was almost 50-50 down the middle in terms of male and female respondents, and it was demographically representative in terms of age and income groups. And like I said, the areas that stood out as slight differences in age were, we did see that those in the 55 and over age groups were slightly decreasing their DIY activity. They indicated that going forward they were less likely to conduct DIY activity, but what we found that we felt offset that, although that age group, that 55-year and older age group, is a larger group in terms of population, we were surprised to see that the younger age groups, which had typically been assumed that they were going to be less likely to perform DIY activity, actually showed a greater increase than anticipated. So we felt that those two really offset one another, the greater increase among the younger age groups as opposed to the decline we were seeing in the older age groups. And again, as we move forward here, there's some male and female differences that I want to talk about as well. So we asked all the consumers that we surveyed to define themselves in terms of their DIY confidence and what they felt they could achieve as a do-it-yourselfer. 22% said they were basics only. I may hang pictures and do a little touch-up painting around the house. 38% classified themselves as a weekend warrior. I can take care of my lawn, paint the occasional room, and fix a leaky toilet. 25% classified themselves as a serious DIYer. Painting rooms, laying tile, installing a garbage disposal are all things I'm comfortable with. And 15% classified themselves as a semi-pro. I can build a deck, drywall a room, or hang a new door without much of a problem. And what that shows, when you compare it to data that we've looked at in years past, is that the comfort level of consumers is increasing with what they feel comfortable doing around their homes. So that's great, because now that not only will they still need help, but they're more confident about the projects they complete, so they're more likely to tackle them. But where it presents a difficulty is that they know more about the products and so on that they're looking for. So retailers, manufacturers really have to be cognizant of that, so they understand that they're getting a more informed, better informed, more well-rounded customer coming through their doors. Here's something, again, when we talk about that male-female difference, here's a number that has just grown by leaps and bounds. 21% of the females that we talked to identified themselves as serious DIYers. 11% identified themselves as semi-pros. And why that's so important, I mean, overall, that's 32% of the females we considered of females we surveyed classified themselves as serious DIYers or semi-pros. So for many years, we've been talking at the retail level about the importance of getting the female shopper into the stores. And what this really illustrates is you have to go beyond things like just adding housewares or giftwares. That's only part of the equation for attracting the female customer. These women are out there doing the projects themselves. They're tackling increasingly difficult projects, and they're also expecting the same degree of product selection, price, and service that their male counterparts. In fact, they're more demanding when it comes to service, products, price, and quality. Here's some statistics when we start delving into where are consumers shopping and turning for advice when it comes to do-it-yourself projects. The percent of consumers identifying these stores as their primary source for home improvement products. 81% of the consumers said their primary source for home improvement products is big boxes. 12% said independent retailers, and 7% said mass merchants. Why that's so important is that independent retailers face a big challenge, and it will become more clear as we move forward through the rest of the slides. Simply by the sheer number of big boxes out there in the country, by the advertising campaign, the prolific number of big boxes in just about every market, more and more consumers are turning to the big box as their primary source for home improvement products. Now, when you look at these numbers, it's important to point out that this did not ask them, is this the only place you shop? So there's a lot of cross-shopping that's going on. But we asked them, what is the primary location? And 81% said big boxes. So obviously, there is a big box culture among today's DIYers that has changed, and the influence of big boxes has grown over the past several years, certainly as a source for products. 47% say they turn to big boxes as their first source for information for DIY products. Now, not only are they purchasing the product there, but they're also turning to big boxes for information. And this is what's particularly important to independent retailers. Independent retailers who consider themselves the first line and the most reliable line for information when it comes to do-it-yourself projects, which translates to their ability to leverage their service. That's really starting to erode, and it's eroding rather dramatically. And independent retailers really need to open their eyes and understand that even though they feel, and even though it may be true that they deliver day-to-day better service than the big boxes, consumer perception is changing. Whether it's changing because of advertising campaigns, whether it's changing because big boxes are investing more money in employee training, or whether it's just an overall perception of service and how that's changed, but it is changing in consumers' minds. And for independent retailers who differentiate their stores by offering greater service, the fact that their service edge continues to erode should be rather alarming. 26%, something else that's important to note is that 26% of respondents say they turn to the internet as their first source for information. So it is impossible as a retailer or a manufacturer or a wholesaler to ignore the importance of the internet, because only 7% of consumers say they turn to independent retailers as their first source for information. So more than 3 times the number of consumers who are turning to independent retailers for information are turning to the internet for information first. So who do you trust? Well, we know where you turn for information, but whose information and advice do you trust more? Well, again here, the big boxes are establishing a foothold with service, and a strong foothold and foundation. 46% of our respondents say that big boxes are the most reliable source of information for DIY projects. 24% say the internet is the most reliable source of information, and 9% say independent retailers are the most reliable source for information. This is another area where there was a very slight difference amongst male and female shoppers. The male shoppers tend to rely more on independent retailers than the female shoppers do, but it's only slight. I believe it was 11% of the male shoppers as opposed to 8%, I think, of the female shoppers. So again, it's a very slight edge, but again, the most marked thing to look at here is the eroding role of the independent retailer when it comes to being a source for information and trusted information for home improvement projects. Now, this is from a study that we did, and again, on the surface it looks fantastic, but it's an alarming thing, again, if you're an independent retailer. We asked customers to identify who is the best at delivering customer service. The majority, 55%, said independent retailers deliver the best customer service, and 40% said big boxes, and 5% said mass merchants. So still, independent retailers have the edge when it comes to customer service. The alarming part of this edge is that this edge over the last 10 years has declined significantly. 10 years ago, independent retailers were said to have the greatest customer service by 64% of consumers. And most all of that was taken from the big box category. So big boxes have taken almost 9 percentage points when it comes to providing better customer service. So again, if you draw that line out further, it's a very precarious course that independent retailers are walking down as we move forward, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed and addressed immediately. When we ask customers what's the single biggest factor when selecting where you shop for home improvement products, we had lowest prices was the biggest. 41% said they want lowest prices. Broadest selection by 33%, best service 21%, and other 5%. So what we got was a pretty good mix. I mean, I've heard the old retail axiom, service, price, and selection, pick any two. Well, customers want all three. So we already know that independent retailers can certainly deliver on these, whether it's through aggressive variable pricing, making sure they're priced right and priced competitively with the market leaders, which are typically the big boxes. We know that independent retailers can deliver the best service, and we know that while they might not have the same square footage as big boxes, they can deliver market-focused selections so that their selection appears to be broader and deeper than the typical big boxes. So we know that independent retailers can deliver on all these, but what we really need to get is that commitment back to being competitive in all three of these areas. And again, I can't stress enough that it's important that independent retailers do not take the service aspect for granted, that they still focus on ways to improve service and make sure that they're not just delivering superior service to the big boxes, but they're delivering what we call the wow factor. Are consumers just blown away by your customer service? So what are some of the things to kind of take away from this? First of all, do-it-yourself activity is alive and well. There are still consumers that are performing do-it-yourself projects. We see over the next 12 months and draw the line out longer that DIY activity is going to gradually continue to increase, which is a little bit different than what we were predicting 3 or 4 years ago. That the economy has made an impact on this, albeit a different one than we originally thought. like I said, 3 or 4 years ago, we were thinking that with the economy the way it was, when people pulling money out of their houses like ATMs, hiring remodelers and contractors to do work around the home, that the economy was going to continue to propel that buy-it-yourself sector. But with all the changes we've seen in this new market reality, do-it-yourself activity is going to grow and grow gradually. And in fact, DIY activity had never really gone away. We did find that the motivations behind DIY activity have changed pretty dramatically, with more consumers interested in fixing, maintaining, and improving their homes because they know they're going to be in them for a while. We know that females are more confident in their abilities and more demanding of the retailers that they use, that there is still a place for professionals in terms of performing activities in the homes. While planned purchases for professional service going forward are down slightly, they're not as off dramatically as we would assume they were. It's just more people are doing do-it-yourself activity. And we also understand that independent retailers have a major challenge going forward with today's new consumer of convincing them that they deliver superior service, but they can also compete when it comes to price and selection. At this point in time, I'd like to see if we have some questions from the audience. Let's see. Are there differences in current future DIY participation by ethnicity? Are Hispanics more inclined to be DIYer versus other ethnic groups? In this survey, we did not address ethnicity, but 2 or 3 years ago, we did a survey where we actually specifically targeted the Hispanic market to see how they are influencing or what their trends are in terms of DIY activity. And we did see at that time that there was a measurable difference in the DIY activity being performed in a Hispanic household. They were considerably more likely to perform DIY activity than a non-Hispanic household. And there are also some of the other findings of that study, and anybody who's interested in those specific findings, if you wanted to send me an email, I'd be happy to get that information to you, that Hispanics not only were more apt to perform DIY activity, they were more apt to stay in their homes longer, and they were more apt to continue DIY activity across generations. So that's certainly a very good question. At this point, we have a couple other questions coming through, but I wanted to point out that this entire webinar will be posted on www.nrha.org. So if you want a copy of the slides or the entire webinar, it takes probably about 10 days for that webinar to get posted, but you can certainly go to the website. Again, it's www.nrha.org to download a complete recording of this webinar or just the slides from the webinar. If you have any additional questions about the webinar, my email address is dant@nrha.org. I'd welcome any questions or comments. You can direct them to me directly after the webinar. Also, I also have a Twitter account that I'd be happy to have any followers that would like to follow me, and the Twitter address is @DanTrottencheck. We have another question here. How about store hours? Lumber yards are seldom open on Saturdays. And, you know, it's difficult to make a blanket statement about store hours or what days of the week a store should be open, simply because it's such a market-by-market answer. I mean, if you're in a rural community that doesn't have a lot of competition, you could probably get away with being closed on a Saturday, on a Sunday. I can't imagine being closed on a Saturday unless you're a very pro-focused yard where most of the work's taking place Monday through Friday. But if you're a consumer-oriented yard, or if you're a pro yard that's recognized that the pro business is probably going to be slow in coming back, and you're starting to expand your selection to try and attract more DIY consumers, then you're going to certainly have to look at extending hours or making your store and your yard more accessible. And that's really all that it's about is you have to listen to your customers, and it's not the same market by market, but you really have to listen to and respond to your customers. I heard a retailer say once, why do so many retailers make it difficult for customers to buy products in their stores? Whether that's with your return policy, whether that's not accepting credit cards, whether that's limiting your hours or closing on particular days of the week. As a retailer in today's competitive environment, you cannot make it difficult for a customer to spend money in your store. And that's why you just really have to listen to and respond to the market and do what they ask you to do. It might not be as comfortable at first, but you really have to take into account what the long-term effects of not meeting those needs are. And it's probably an important point here to talk about the concept of service. When we ask customers, consumers, specifics about service, so many retailers identify service with product knowledge. And while product knowledge is an important part of service, it's only one component. So let's say a customer comes into your store and you have a great team of individuals that know a lot about plumbing. Well, what if a customer comes into your store for a paint project? Well, then product knowledge really doesn't come into play in that area. So you really have to look at the totality of service and how customers define service, and that, again, is in many different segments. Price is an element of service. Store hours are an element of service. Return policies are an element of service. The lighting in your store, the ease to get in and out of your store, are the lines in your parking lot striped? All of those things customers take into account when they're defining service. So you may be able to out-service the big boxes because you have a few people that know a lot about the products in your store, a lot about projects, but that's just one small slice of it. You really need to take a holistic approach to finding out how you can deliver premium customer service. I know we have, let's see, a couple other questions coming through here. Just another question I have here about someone wanting the information from the Hispanic DIY participation. Anybody who would like that, if they could please send me an email directly to dant@nrha.org. I would be happy to. I don't know if I have that in electronic form, but I certainly can make copies of it and send it out to you directly. That being said, do we have any other questions before I wrap things up here? Are there any other specific types of DIY projects that consumers are taking on more often than others? Yeah, and another thing I want to point out here is the information we went over in today's webinar is really just kind of a taste of the entire survey we did. The overall research project was pretty vast in scope, and we've just really kind of hit the mountaintops on this presentation here. And we did have an entire section where we asked consumers what DIY projects they've performed in the last 12 months and what DIY projects they're likely to perform in the next 12 months. And what we're seeing more consumers doing is typical home repair and maintenance stuff, fixing things around their home, and painting. Painting certainly stood out as the high point, and I don't know that that's something that's particularly new, but I do think that more consumers are looking at painting because of what we talked about. Is they're staying in their homes longer, and it's a project that they can conduct that isn't a big money project. Doesn't require a big financial investment. It can have a pretty dramatic impact. So we're seeing painting as a strong project as we move forward. Something else that emerged was home storage and organization. That kind of came from out of the blue. I didn't anticipate that being one of the bigger project areas going forward, but it did. It really emerged as one of the areas where consumers are looking to perform more projects, and it's across all areas of the home. It's really in the bedrooms and in the garage. So again, if I would have to identify two, I think painting and home storage and organization really stood out, as well as kind of myriad other home repair and maintenance projects like fixing a leaky toilet, fixing a faucet. Also, we saw installing ceiling fans and outdoor living projects also really kind of stood out. Let's see here. I think that wraps it up for all the questions we have at this point. So I would like to thank you guys all for attending the webinar. I'd like to encourage you to attend more NRHA webinars in the future. As I said, if you're interested in further topics and additional webinars in the future, please go to www.nrha.org, and there is a list of the webinars with their dates, and you can sign up for those webinars right through the website. So again, I'd like to thank you all for coming. If you have any other questions, my email address is up there, and thank you all and have a very prosperous day.